This just into CNN, showing Russian soldiers firing what appear to be warning shots at the start at protesters in the eastern Ukrainian city of Novopskov. As you can see, all those people are unarmed. Those warning shots, it seemed fired in the air at the beginning, but CNN found evidence that at least one protester was shot in the leg there. We'll continue to find more information as we can. What they were saying there was Ukraine, Ukraine, shouting their country's names to those Russian soldiers. Joining me now, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling. He's the former commanding general for Europe as well as the 7th Army. General Hertling, good to have you on. You've made the point frequently over the last several days that the maps we often look at that show where Russian forces are in this country are misleading because those Russian forces don't actually control all those areas or many of those areas that they're in. And I wonder, as you look at that video there, does that give you that sense when you have people with the courage, frankly, to stand up, to walk towards the soldiers rather than away from them?
That's what I've been saying since this conflict began, Jim. If you are, as a nation, have a relatively strong army, the support of the population, and the leadership of the government for the right causes, you're going to win any conflict. Now, Russia has the opposite of all of that. They have a corrupt and criminal leader. It's obvious that the Russian people are not supporting this operations based on the amount of activity we've seen in various Russian cities. And what I would add to that is the Russian military has shown themselves to be just incompetent and not able to execute a ridiculous plan, in my view. What we've seen over the last few days, you saw, you just showed the film of the citizens of that Ukrainian city. What we who study this war have also been looking at is the Russian airborne troops, the so-called vaunted VDB, have performed terribly. Those were supposed to be the strike force that went in first. And that's probably infuriating Mr. Putin, but they have repeatedly been ambushed. They've lost entire units. They've lost equipment. The Russian forces, while still large, is very clumsy logistically. And I predict that within the next 3 to 5 days, they will culminate in their attacks because they have pushed their attacks too far. That doesn't negate the fact.
Culminate? What do you mean by culminate?
As they have done many times before, continue to kill citizens and civilians and commit war crimes.
That's the thing we're seeing now, right, is that more and more targeting, certainly of civilian areas, civilians. We have accounts today that at least the deputy mayor of the town of Mariupol told me it appeared that Russia was deliberately targeting people in those quote-unquote humanitarian corridors. The thing is, that is Putin's playbook. He used it in Syria. He used it in Chechnya in the late 1990s, and it succeeded, though, there. I mean, it's in a scorched earth way. Are you concerned that that's what he does here? And if he can't win it, you know, the old, in a fair way, if there's any word, but that he would just burn the place down?
And that is a concern, Jim, but what I'll say is the examples that have been used repeatedly, and yes, Russia did do the same things under Assad's regime in Syria. They did the same thing under a government that they controlled in Chechnya, and there was no fighting back from the local population. The difference here is you have a population that is about to, it already is, partly going into a guerrilla war. They are going to destroy troops, and Russia does not have the advantage of supporting and providing logistics to the multi-prongs attacks they've made throughout a country the size of Texas. They just can't handle it. They've taken on too much, and that's why they're going to culminate. They will not be able to support their troops in the north, in the south, in the east, and in the center part of the country. They're trying to be everywhere, and they're going to be nowhere, which was a phrase I used about 10 days ago.
So, as you know, the U.S., NATO, they've taken a no-fly zone off the table. And by the way, the Russian president, Putin, said today that he would treat foreign aircraft in Ukrainian airspace as part of an armed conflict. I mean, he seemed to be declaring war on anyone who might try that. What then is a step short of that that can help further shore up Ukrainian forces? They're already getting hundreds of these anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles, and those seem to be having an impact on the battlefield. What else? Or is there something else that's possible?
Yes, the continued shipment of Stingers, any kind of endless weapons, any kind of anti-tank weapons, support in terms of small arms for the guerrillas that will be coming by, and all of that, literally thousands of tons of equipment, billions of dollars of equipment have already been shipped and continue to be shipped. There's about 17 large body airplanes landing in Poland every single day with new equipment for Ukraine about to be shipped across the border, and it's getting there. But I think the other important part that we sometimes don't talk about, Jim, is targeting information. Now, what I would say is we're not telling Ukraine exactly what to hit, but we, the United States and NATO, are giving them excellent intelligence and helping them to conduct operations on the battlefield, telling them where Russian forces are, where they might be heading, where logistics nodes are. All of that's critically important.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing deliberately not advertised, right, by U.S. and NATO forces. General Mark Hertling, thanks so much as always.
You got it, Jim.
Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin, as we were just noting there, issued a new threat, saying that he would consider countries which imposed or would impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine as participating in armed conflict. Top U.S. and NATO officials continue to refuse calls for a no-fly zone here, fearing it could start a war, a direct one, between NATO forces and Russia. Secretary of State Tony Blinken, he is in Poland right now, just across the border from here, meeting with refugees, also discussing security in the region and pledging financial assistance for the growing refugee crisis. CNN's Natasha Bertrand, she's at EU headquarters in Brussels. Natasha, we're seeing a lot of these trips. General Milley has been over here too. U.S. NATO officials deliberately, I suppose you could say, shoring up confidence visits, you might say, to some of these countries, particularly Eastern facing. What substantively is he doing, promising, to come out of these visits?
That's right, Jim. And I'll also make a quick note that Vice President Kamala Harris is also traveling to Poland and Romania next week, also in a show of support to those Eastern flank NATO countries. But essentially what Antony Blinken wants to do is he wants to get everyone kind of on the same page about the crisis in Ukraine, about the weaponry that they're going to be sending, about the humanitarian assistance. And of course, he wants to show his support for how Poland has welcomed in over 700,000 refugees fleeing that violence and thanking them for being an ally that has agreed to house American soldiers there. Of course, Poland feeling very vulnerable given Russia's onslaught in Ukraine. And so it's a very important ally for those reasons, as well as the fact, as General Hertling had mentioned earlier, that this is a transit point for weapons to enter Ukraine, for those countries that want to send this lethal assistance to actually get them into the country. Now, Blinken is actually meeting right now, or he just did, with refugees who are fleeing that violence. And he told one of them that what the Ukrainians are doing is inspiring the world.
What Ukrainians are doing is inspiring the world. And the world is united in support of Ukraine and against Russia's aggression. And we are working very closely with our Polish friends.